I support the Terrorism and Other Legislation Amendment, but lament the circumstances in which it is being considered. Only after the murder of 15 innocent people in what was a heinous act of evil are we here to rush through legislation that deals with three main issues. I will deal with each individually, but not without first acknowledging what the bill does not deal with: the main cause of the tragedy in Bondi, which is unchecked anti-Semitism and the erosion of social harmony in this state. This bill should be about that. Instead, it deals with the ancillary. Important, but by no means the reason, that two people committed Australia's most deadly terrorist attack in Bondi just over a week ago. I feel I have to raise this to reflect what I hear all too often from my constituents in Ryde, that governments and parliaments only ever act when it is too late. You see it every day with traffic black spots. The data just never supports action until there is a fatality. Regional communities are almost always forgotten until there is a devastating flood or bushfire. I am watching it play out right now with artificial intelligence. The government barely understands it, let alone knows how to empower it for good. This latency drives cynicism in politics, which is why today cannot be the end of our response to Bondi. However, this bill does do some things that I believe offers some good for society, even if imperfect or incomplete. This moment marks an inflection point for our country, and how we decide to act now will determine the course of our society into the future. If we take a stand, it will signal that we take this issue seriously, that we recognise the culture of our country has changed, and that we are choosing not to accept an erosion of our way of life thrust upon us by our enemies. If we don't act, the signal that we send is one of acceptance, that we accept forces of evil dictating our lives, that we accept a less safe society, that we accept that harmony and diversity is no longer the hallmark that attracts the best and brightest to our shores from everywhere in the world. We need to decide, and while this bill only deals with part of the issue, it is nevertheless a part that cannot be ignored if it will make even a small difference. On guns, I have long held serious concerns about firearms. I respect primary producers and regional communities, and I do not claim to fully understand the lived experience of lawful firearm owners whose livelihoods or way of life depend on them. But the community that I represent is metropolitan, culturally diverse, increasingly dense, and composed of people working professional, service-based or localised jobs. We do not have the same need for firearms that exist elsewhere, and the risks associated with them are necessarily different. It is for this reason that I was so outraged when the same government, now introducing these laws today, sought to weaken the same gun laws just a matter of months ago. They sought to do this as part of a political deal with the Shooters Party to secure political support for completely unrelated laws concerning workers' compensation. For those who oppose guns, this was deeply offensive. But even for those who support sensible and lawful gun ownership, it should have been equally troubling to see such a serious matter treated as a bargaining chip for political convenience. It was wrong on every level and exposed an uncomfortable truth about the standards of integrity of this government. I raise this because the only thing that frustrates the public more than the latency and reactionary approach to policy is when we fail to exceed the frankly low public expectation for integrity in their political leaders. In that vein, I am remaining consistent in my conviction that we can do more on guns in this state, and not just because of the events in Bondi. That it took a tragedy to act is in fact a tragedy, but I would not be consistent with my own conscience not to support these changes. Requiring the recipient of a gun licence to be an Australian citizen, communicating with intelligence agencies before determining whether to issue a gun licence, and overall seeking to reduce the number of guns available, particularly high-powered ones, are all common sense reforms that I support. Those aspects of the bill that encroach further on lawful gun owners' ability to obtain and use guns have caused consternation, and I acknowledge those who have expressed this to me respectfully. It is for this reason that I feel it is appropriate for these new laws to be reviewed promptly, that is, within 12 months, so that we can resolve any unintended consequences, weigh up risks with benefits, and learn from the data collected. This should be standard with most legislation, but particularly legislation that is rushed. We should also seek to ensure that the $7.9 million of funding inserted into the budget by the Minns government to promote guns and hunting are not just reapportioned, but that such a callous act can never happen again. Guns should not be a card for the government to trade away next time it finds itself in political trouble. As we now know, lives are lost when guns fall into the hands of the wrong people, and that must never be enabled. On protests. Since October 7, we have seen ongoing and relentless protests in this state, too much of it provocative, dangerous, and hateful. I am a strong supporter of civic engagement, but the right to protest is not absolute. There is a fundamental difference between protesting the actions of a foreign government and targeting people under the guise of protesting a government. Australians are entitled to protest government policies, foreign or domestic, but not to harass, intimidate, or incite hatred against fellow citizens, nor to express support for organisations designated as terrorist groups. It should not need to be said, but the unchecked spread of extremism has shifted the Overton window to a point where it now must be clearly stated unequivocally. It is acceptable to criticise governments, their parties, their politicians, and their political decisions. It is not acceptable to protest against people because of who they are or what they choose to believe. Nor is it acceptable to drain police and emergency resources to perpetuate division. For that reason, I support amendments that place reasonable constraints on protest locations, particularly for ongoing demonstrations. Without these changes, it would be entirely lawful for the type of protests that we have seen weekly in the Sydney CBD to occur in Bondi tomorrow, an outcome that would be patently unreasonable. The cause of protest matters. We rightly prohibit discrimination in workplaces, so why should the public be forced to fund protests that do precisely that? We accept and we know that it is wrong, so let's not be so stupid as to pay to be insulted. We should be amending this bill to develop a mechanism to recover costs and ensure more public resources are dedicated to public services and ventures that promote harmony, not division. On terrorist symbols. One of the clearest indicators that a protest is not being conducted in good faith is the use of terrorist symbols or rhetoric. There is a world of difference between a nurse marching for fair pay and someone chanting threats, displaying terrorist paraphernalia, or calling for the destruction of a people. The latter is not a protest. It is intimidation. It is not advocacy. It is hate. I therefore support measures that strengthen the ability of law enforcement to act against those who misuse democratic freedoms to undermine democracy itself. I find it deeply offensive that individuals exploit the tolerance of our system to promote intolerant ideologies. There must be limits to our tolerance, for if we begin to tolerate the intolerant, we will inevitably destroy ourselves. That is the choice before us, and it is why we must act today. This brings me to what I find most troubling. This bill does not mention anti-Semitism, it does not confront hate, it does not speak to harmony, cohesion, or the social fabric that has been so violently torn. Nor does it interrogate the extraordinary claim made repeatedly by the Prime Minister following the attack that this extremism was somehow right-wing. Extremism is not an extension of political belief. It is a rejection of it. It is a repudiation of democracy itself, sitting beyond the bounds of lawful civil society. I have never hesitated to condemn far-right ideology. I reject reactionary politics, despise culture wars, and believe strongly in inclusion over division. But far-right ideology was not responsible for the murder of 15 innocent people in Bondi. Islamist extremism and anti-Semitism were. Speaker, I ask for a brief extension.
The question is the member's time be extended, or that if you can say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I think the House. These are not partisan phenomena. They are not ideological labels to be assigned for political expediency. They are evils, and they must be confronted honestly. Addressing this core societal problem is where I want this Parliament to go next. Politicians that seek to attribute the Bondi tragedy to anything else are being disingenuous at a time when leadership beckons. Because the strength of our democracy depends on our willingness to tell the truth, even when it is uncomfortable, and to hold the centre by refusing both denial and distortion. That's what I've sought to do in this debate. I hope colleagues will do the same. I commend the bill to the House.